going to look at something called CRVS. What is CRVS? Well, let's find out together. Okay, so if we again go back to our demographic. Okay, now in this video, the CR stands for civil registration. Okay, so these are basically when you register a birth, a death, or a marriage, and you get some evidence of that. Okay, so here is a picture of somebody collecting information, basically writing out a birth certificate in a hospital for this beautiful little baby who's just been born in Equatorial Guinea. And as well as births and deaths and marriages, and there'll be other things registered as well, sometimes when you leave a country or a territory, sometimes when you move in as well. And so this is an example of a death register, of a death certificate. Okay, and as you can see, everybody should get one, because this is the death certificate of Queen Elizabeth II. You can see here she was born in 1926. She died on September the 8th, 2022 in Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Her usual residence is Windsor Castle. And then we have causes of death here as well. In the case of Queen Elizabeth, they just put old age, but you can have various different causes of death. And we have other information here as well. So her husband, which is Prince Philip, and then the name and the occupation of the father. So her father's name was Albert Frederick Arthur George Windsor, and his job was king. His job was King George VI. Okay, so we have all of this information there. This is the informant, so who registered this information. In this case, it was Princess Anne, and then who signs it off here and when they sign it off. So this is an official government document. Yeah? And of course, these can be found all over the world. Here is an old example from Hong Kong back in the colonial times. This is about 90 years old. You can see here put in English and in Chinese as well, all the information about a birth. And of course, now this has been done. This is not done in this very old-fashioned way anymore. We have electronic birth registration, automatic birth registration, but you would still get birth certificates, still get a piece of paper with this information on. So civil registration is the individual pieces of information, but then vital statistics are the numbers which are derived from civil registration. Okay, so civil registration is, I'm going to write a birth certificate and give you a birth certificate. Vital statistics are, okay, we have given out 25,000 birth certificates this year. So the statistic of vital events is that there have been 25,000 births in our territory. Okay, CRVS. Now, if you look at the census video, you'll see that census is very, very widespread. Almost all countries of the world, apart from a few which are undergoing conflict or some territorial dispute or real grinding poverty, are able to perform a census. However, this is not the case with CRVS. And in fact, when we look at this map here, it's really striking that in the global south, we call the global south, sorry, CRVS coverage is actually very poor. In fact, there's around 250 million, so 230 billion children under the age of 5 do not have any kind of birth certificate. Okay, do not have any registration. And so 4 in 10 babies born in 2012 were not registered. And the countries with the highest, or well, I should say the lowest birth registration levels, or the highest non-registration levels, are in sub-Saharan Africa, sometimes as high as 14% in Zambia and 16% in Chad. So how do we get around that? How can we calculate these fertility rates if we need the number of births, but we don't have the number of births coming from vital statistics? Well, here we have some an explanation from the United Nations about how they calculate fertility rates. So on the left-hand side, we can see in Austria, and here, well, it's very, very simple. Okay, they just take the number of registered births from the birth register. Okay, so they have a very full and complete and comprehensive registration system. But then we go to Afghanistan, and then, of course, we have this very long explanation of how the number of births are calculated and then how the fertility rates are calculated. So this DHS is a survey, a demographic and health survey. This is another survey. This is another survey. This is a kind of complicated statistical method which you can derive from census. That's another survey there. This is another statistical method. You do indirect estimates. Now, we don't have to worry. Don't panic. We're not going to learn these in this course here. But clearly what we've got to do is a lot of mathematical, statistical games, we should say, using the very incomplete data that we have in Afghanistan, for example. And in fact, when it comes to mortality, and migration, there's actually no information at all there. So we have to use this completely based on statistical tools and devices from elsewhere. But of course, that we can do. So you could say, well, that's fine. We can just do all of these statistical tests and analysis, so we don't need to worry too much about very low levels of registration. However, this is not really good enough, because we know that without a birth certificate, children can be excluded from many, many services such as education and healthcare. And also, if you don't have an identity, if you don't have a piece of paper saying who you are, then you're much more vulnerable to trafficking, exploitation, prostitution, recruitment or forced recruitment into armed forces and services. And later on in life, as you know, if you need to try and get things done, maybe you need to show a birth certificate. But if you don't have that, it's harder to vote. So it's easier for governments to exploit. It's harder to get a passport, to apply for a job, to get a bank account, to get a mobile phone, to get married, and so on. So it's not just about calculating issues. It's one thing we'll come to over and over again in this course, right? Yes, demography and population is important, but very often it's these bigger questions which are actually just as, if not more, important. And of course, we think about, well, why don't countries invest in CRVS more? Well, of course, some can't afford it. It's expensive and there's infrastructure. But then also in many countries and territories, there is a question of trust. Maybe you don't want the government to know exactly who you are and where you live and who you've married and how many children you have. Okay. Particularly, this can become an issue around tax. If you don't trust the government with your information, you don't think that you think they are not governing very well, this can, you might want to stay out of the system. Now, another direction that we can go in, so in the census video we talked about population registers, but also increasingly we're using big data. Now, there are various different types of big data. We have exhaust data, so this is from GPS tracking. Some articles and studies are now using web content, so crowdsourcing and social media, Google searches. And of course, we can use sensing data from remote sensing, drones and smart meters. So here we can use mobile phone data, for example, to look at the movement of people and dynamic population mapping over time. So to conclude, we use the census or population registers normally for population, and then CRVS normally for events like births and deaths. Well, if we want to understand more on the context of these, then we need broader social study, which we'll look at later on. So the census is widespread, but it is expensive. It has a long time gap. And as we said in the other video, that's why population registers are becoming more popular. But then CRVS coverage and quality is much lower. And then, although we can make statistical workarounds, but there are clearly issues on identity which need to be resolved. So we would say, and finally, population registers, surveys and big data are future directions of demographics.